Good afternoon, good evening, whenever, wherever you are listening. Thank you so very much for making me a part of your day. My name is Lee Parham. You might know me as Lego Lee or Lego Lee 329 from Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, you name it. I'm all over the internet, and this is the Brickology podcast, the study of small plastic bricks. How are you doing today on the very first day of May? That rhymed unintentionally. Yes, today is May 1st, and this is the official start of Season 2 of Brickology. I am very excited. And before I jump into today's main topic, let's, do a typical little, kind of weekly catch-up thing with Brickology. Last week's Q&A has done very well. I'm very happy with the results of that episode. I think Season 1 was overall a good learning experience for me as a podcaster. I think my episodes got progressively better, and then my 10th episode had a lot of technical difficulties, and that was kind of a step back. But besides that 10th episode, I think last week and all of my other episodes, Season 1, got progressively better. I learned, I listened to y'all's constructive criticism, and I think Brickology has really started to form into something special that I am very proud of, and I think I am coming into my own as a podcaster, and it's being reflected in my streams. I have reached over 2,000 people with Brickology, which is super exciting, and it continues to grow every single day. So I'm really excited for what the future holds with Brickology. We're going to keep at a weekly schedule. We're also going to keep at the schedule of alternating between a licensed theme and an unlicensed theme. So technically, since last week was the Q&A, we're going to look back at episode 10, even though that was still part of season 1, which that was an unlicensed theme with Lego Atlantis. So this week, the next follow-up episode is going to be a licensed theme. And obviously, if you have seen the title, you know what's going on. So thank you guys so much for how Brickology is going. The month of April was very interesting for me and for the world, and it's just been a crazy, crazy time. And the silver lining I've been able to take away from this whole thing is that this podcast, I think, has really started to form into something that I am very proud of. And I seriously, every time a few people have kind of like poked fun every time that I say thank you so very much for making me a part of your day. I say that at the beginning of every episode. The reason I say that is because I seriously mean it. Like, thank you for listening to this podcast. The fact that some people out there are making a 40-minute to an hour-long podcast a part of their week and whatever day they're listening to is insane to me. That y'all are out there. There are crazy Lego fans out there that want to listen to this. That is amazing. That is great. And that is the thing right now that really keeps me going. It's definitely, kind of helped me in this very odd time in the world. So thank you everybody for a great first season of Brickology. And I am so excited to bring to you the premiere of Brickology Season 2. Now, the pilot episode of Brickology a few months ago was about Lego Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace Sets. I made the first episode of Brickology about the first episode chronologically for Star Wars, and that was a great episode. That's still to this day, I believe, the only episode of Brickology that's over an hour long. Very long episode, and I really dove deep in that episode to the history of Star Wars as a brand and then Lego Star Wars. I'm not going to do that today. Now, you probably have already figured out, since, I think it's fitting, since my first episode, the premiere of Season 1, was about Star Wars, the premiere of Season 2 will be also about Star Wars. I already did Star Wars The Clone Wars, that was the 4th episode of Brickology, but now it's time to do Lego Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. And a lot of you have been clamoring for more Star Wars episodes, and they will be coming. Each 10 episode season of Brickology will have at least 2 Star Wars episodes. Guaranteed. I don't want to do too much Star Wars because this is a Lego podcast. This is not a Star Wars podcast, but I do recognize Star Wars is the biggest brand for Lego, and it's a reason I think a lot of people follow me in the first place. The majority of my videos and Instagram posts are about Star Wars, so there will be at least 2 Star Wars episodes of Brickology every single season. And even though I mixed it up with the Clone Wars episode coming before this Attack of the Clones episode, from here on out, every single Star Wars episode of Brickology will be in chronological order in which they happen in the film. So today's episode is about Star Wars Episode 2. Now, you can guess it, since I've already done the Clone Wars episode, the next Star Wars episode will be about Star Wars Episode 3, and then we'll move into Solo and Rebels and, so on and so forth. So that's just kind of how this whole Star Wars thing is going to go, and I think it's only fitting for the premiere of Season 2 to be about Star Wars Episode 2. Also, though, in my episode 1 episode, the first episode of Brickology and about Star Wars episode 1, does get a little bit confusing, I spent, I think, half an hour talking about the history of Star Wars and Star Wars toys. I'm not going to repeat myself about that here. I will definitely reference it, but I'm not going to do that crazy deep dive. So this is a completely shameless plug for you to go listen to the first ever episode of Brickology if you have not. Now, that episode is a little more rough than this one, the audio and the way I speak, and a lot of things definitely aren't as good. But I'm still proud of that episode, and it still has a lot of valuable information that I think will enhance this episode. You'll still be able to listen to this episode fine if you haven't, but I would suggest listening to that one first and then coming back to this episode to kind of understand better what's going on with Star Wars and Star Wars toys. Okay. A lot of announcements out of the way. Let's finally dive deep into the history of Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, and the LEGO sets surrounding it. The year is 2002. Bionicle from LEGO had just started. LEGO Star Wars is still fairly new, and I had just finished preschool. I was 5 years old at the time of these sets coming out. And if you'd listened to the episode 1 podcast, you would know that I definitely hit over the head the fact that episode 1 toys did not sell very well. There's a lot of reasons for that. They made so many of them, and then the movie was a huge critical disappointment. So episode 1 toys were not the big smash hit that toy companies and Lucasfilm were hoping for. So as a result of this, Lucasfilm, Hasbro, LEGO, all these companies that make Star Wars toys, they definitely, had to look at themselves in the mirror for a second. They had to take a step back on the production of these toys. There are a lot less episode 2 toys than there were episode 1 toys. And in fact, episode 2, I think, is easily the most underrepresented Star Wars movie before the new Disney era films. And I think like Solo, a Star Wars toy, is probably the most underrepresented movie now. But now, for like at this time especially, and even compared to episode 3 that came after it, and even like Force Awakens later on down the line, episode 2 really doesn't have as big a push for toys and marketing and brands, and it's actually the lowest grossing film from the peak prequel trilogy. There just isn't quite as much stuff surrounding episode 2. And I also think part of that has to relate to the fact that episode 2 at the time, in my opinion, is the worst Star Wars movie there is. Now, I love episode 2. I have tons of nostalgia around episode 2. I can quote the heck out of that movie. I have it pretty much memorized inside and out, and I own a ton of episode 2 merchandise. But I think episode 2, for a long time, was the worst Star Wars film. The script, Hayden Christensen's acting, Natalie Portman and Hayden Christensen's chemistry on screen. I mean, really, this movie is just not very good. It is not a good movie. And despite the fact that I could literally watch it whenever I wanted to and be fine and entertained, it definitely, as someone who's also a film fan and studied film in college, it just definitely isn't a great film by any means. And obviously episode 1 was a big disappointment in that regard as well. And then episode 2 definitely didn't get better than episode 1. I think it's up for some debate which one's worse, but in my opinion, episode 2 is probably worse than episode 1. That definitely doesn't really help toy sales as well, because these toy companies are like, well, if people don't really like the movie, they're probably not going to buy too many toys from this. And I think episode 2 is at a loss for some of those iconic moments. I think honestly the more memorable moments from episode 2 are kind of memorable in an infamous sort of way. People remember episode 2 for an overuse of CGI and for Yoda flipping around like a freak and just looking absolutely ridiculous. And then of course for Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin's terrible haircuts, and obviously for the romantic scenes and Anakin just being a complete freak and creeper towards Padme and their ridiculous stilted chemistry and some of the worst dialogue you will ever hear in your life. I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere. Sorry for the terrible Hayden Christensen Anakin Skywalker impersonation, but I think you get what I'm talking about. Episode 2, not that it's forgotten, it's definitely a very famous and, important film, but I think it's remembered for a lot of the wrong reasons, and it didn't really have that iconic scene like Episode 1 did with the Darth Maul Duel the Fates fight, or even the pod race, for that matter. Episode 2, I think, of the prequels, has the least iconic moments, it has the worst dialogue, the worst acting, and it's very boring, and it's the longest. It was the longest Star Wars film until The Last Jedi came out, and actually, I think it was the worst Star Wars film until The Last Jedi came out, and I'll definitely talk about The Last Jedi at some point in the future of Brickology, and The Last Jedi surprisingly kind of usurped Episode 2 at the bottom of my Star Wars ranking list. But needless to say, Episode 2, definitely not a beloved film. And Episode 2 holds the unique distinction of, for the original 6 Star Wars movies, it has by far the least amount of Lego sets. I mean, seriously, in total, there's about a little bit over 20 Episode 2 sets. Brick Set has it listed at 19, but that doesn't count random things like UCS sets. So in total, though, it's very few, and it's even less than movies like The Force Awakens, which came out, 5 years ago, as opposed to Episode 2 that now has come out 18 years ago. So Episode 2 is very underrepresented in Lego form, and I honestly think it's criminally underrepresented, and I'll talk about that here in just a minute. And the first launch wave of Episode 2 came out in 2002, spring of 2002. The movie came out in May of 2002, and the first launch wave came out in the spring of 2002. And then we didn't get a wave for like 10 years. There was a couple random things sprinkled here and there, but we didn't really get a wave until 2013. And Lego did kind of a reboot wave of Episode 2 to coincide with the 3D re-release of the film. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Fox, when they used to own Lucasfilm and the rights to Star Wars, they had this big 3D re-release thing. Episode 1 was released in 3D in theaters of February 2012. They had special glasses, it was this whole thing, and actually made a decent bit of money. They were going to do the same thing for every Star Wars film, and there was going to be one every year. So 2013, the next year, they were going to re-release Episode 2 in theaters, and toy companies saw that. So that's why all the 2013 box arts for Star Wars stuff is Episode 2, Geonosia's background with CGI Yoda. That's why in 2012, it was Darth Maul to coincide with Episode 1, and in 2014, they had Darth Vader, a very Episode 3-esque box art to coincide with what was going to be the 3D re-release of Episode 3. This was all planned out for Lego, and that's why they had these big waves of these prequel sets, a decade removed from the films coming out. And then Disney bought Lucasfilm, and they completely canned the idea of these 3D re-releases for these Star Wars movies. So it didn't happen, but Lego still went full ahead with their entire wave of Episode 2 sets. So really, mainly for Episode 2, we got a big wave 2002, a big wave in 2013, and some random things, very random and very few things sprinkled in, all for a combined total of only 19 sets plus a couple of UCS sets. It's pretty wild. There's really just not a whole lot to talk about, so I'll definitely go in depth with each of these sets more so than I do on other episodes of Brickology when there are more sets to talk about, and I honestly wish there were more. And there's some of these sets that I wish would have remakes, and I'll talk about that here in just a second. But at the same time, as bad as a movie as Episode 2 is, I think Episode 2 has some of the greatest sets and vehicle designs you will ever see from Star Wars. So let's jump straight in. The first Episode 2 set we will talk about is the Jedi Duel. This was a $10 set that had 82 pieces, and this was the duel that I've already mentioned this episode between Count Dooku and Yoda. First off, getting those two characters in a $10 set is pretty fantastic, and more importantly, this was the first ever Lego Yoda minifigure. He had a brand new mold for his head. So that was a very big deal. A lot of people were really stoked to finally get a Lego Yoda minifigure. This set, though, is super inaccurate. It comes with this weird side build that's like this crane, which I guess is supposed to represent, them moving around the pieces in, the Geonosian base, but it just looks awkward and weird and kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. But you also get Count Dooku's speeder. The speeder actually has a pretty good design in terms of its shaping. It looks a good bit like the speeder from the movie, and that speeder is a good bit different from other speeder bikes in Star Wars. However, it is sand blue, which is a great color. I love sand blue, and I wish LEGO would do more stuff in sand blue, like TIE fighters, but the speeder in the movie is gray and brown. The fact that it was sand blue is just completely inaccurate. Now, I'm assuming it was sand blue because of some concept art issue, and it was ended up, being changed later on the production of the film, which is, kind of out of LEGO's control. But it was still an extremely inaccurate color for the speeder. That being said, though, this is still a great set. It introduced awesome new pieces, including Yoda's head mold and Count Dooku's curved lightsaber, which is a super unique and fun lightsaber piece that LEGO still uses to this day for the character. Weird set, definitely inaccurate in the build, but great minifigures and a great deal. Also for $10, we got the Tuscan Raider Encounter. This set had 93 pieces and included Anakin on a swoop bike. Swoop bikes are kind of like the dirt bikes of Star Wars. We actually recently saw them in The Mandalorian. And the swoop bike LEGO made for this was pretty cool. Used a lot of dark red pieces, which was a fairly, uncommon color for LEGO at the time. And it also included a moisture evaporator, which is, something that LEGO commonly includes in sets that are on desert planets like Tatooine, where this set is taking place. This set, though, had a very misleading box art image. If you're listening to an audio version of this, I would suggest go looking up the box art for the Tuscan Raider Encounter set, because it shows a repeating image of moisture evaporators in the background, and it's clearly the LEGO versions. And I remember buying this set when I was like 5, and I thought it came with like 3 or 4 moisture evaporators, and I was really let down when you only got 1. So that's kind of a weird, strange thing about this set, but I do think it does have a misleading box art. But this set also was the cheapest way to get Anakin Skywalker at the time, and it was also the first set to ever include Tuscan Raiders. They are becoming more common in LEGO now. They've come in a number of sets, but this was the first time they were ever made, and this is actually the only Tuscan Raider figure we had up until one was included with the T-16 Skyhopper in 2015. So these Tuscan Raider figures were pretty special, and they actually hold up pretty well today. They didn't have a molded head, they had a printed head, normal minifigure head piece, but it was good printing and they looked very good. And obviously this scene is definitely, a pretty powerful scene in the movie. It is followed up by a really terrible speech where Anakin's like, "And I slaughtered them like animals, but not just the men, but the women, and the children too. I hate them." Again, with the terrible Anakin Skywalker impersonations, but it is a powerful scene, and it's really the first time you see Anakin really kind of channeling in on this evil Darth Vader dark side energy. It's a good scene in the film, and it's a pretty good representation of that in LEGO form, and it's the only time we've ever gotten this in LEGO form, and I think it wouldn't be a bad remake to maybe kind of expand on the Tuscan Raider village a bit, maybe include Shmi Skywalker or something. It could be, I think, a pretty good $20 to $30 set in modern LEGO form, and I would love to see a remake of that. Next up, for $20 from this wave, we had the Jedi Starfighter. This set had 139 pieces, and it's the first ever LEGO Jedi Starfighter. If you listen to my episode about the Clone Wars sets, in that episode I mentioned that they have made a lot of Jedi Starfighters, and they continue to make them year in and year out. There are so many of them. This is the OG LEGO Jedi Starfighter, and I think this one actually holds up pretty well today and honestly looks better than the remake, and we'll talk about the remake later on in this episode. It's an iconic vehicle design. It looks really good, more dark red pieces. It had really nice printed pieces. It included Obi-Wan, which is the cheapest way to get this version of Obi-Wan at the time, and it also included his droid, his head. It actually didn't include the droid body. They hadn't figured out a way to put the droid body into the wing of the Jedi Starfighter, so you just get the droid's head, which is kind of disappointing, but it's a good design. It was an iconic set. I remember my brother getting this set back in the day. He was still fairly young, and I was really young, and I thought it was super cool. It's a great set, and it took them way too long to remake it, but it's a great set, and it's an iconic set, and an iconic ship from the film that definitely, I think, holds up pretty well to this day. For $10 more, we had the $30 Bounty Hunter Pursuit. This set had 259 pieces, and this recreated the opening, big opening action scene in episode 2 that's early on in the film, the Coruscant speeder chase. So you got the yellow speeder for Anakin and Obi-Wan, and this design is really good. They used astromech droid bodies to make the engine with a cool print on it. That was a very clever design. And you also got the green speeder for Zam Wassail, which is a very unique vehicle. It used a Jack Stone printed cockpit piece, and we'll definitely talk about Jack Stone at some point on Brickology because that is one weird LEGO theme. But besides the point, it was a very cool green speeder. The green speeder had a feature where you could push it, it would like kind of explode. Weird thing, but you didn't get the Zam Wassail minifigure. While Anakin and Obi-Wan have been remade, this is the only ever figure of Zam Wassail in physical LEGO form, and this is one of the first figures ever to have a double-sided face. Not the first figure ever, I believe that was Professor Quirrell from the Harry Potter sets, but it is one of the early double-sided face LEGO figures. And this is also the only time this scene has been made in LEGO. LEGO, what are you doing? Make this again. It's a pretty good scene in the movie. It has two very cool and unique speeders, and you could either make the speeders separate sets to be like $30, or you can make a bigger like $60 set or something, or even expand, make the set bigger, include, you know, Padme and Jango Fett and that droid that Zam Wassail sends with those worms to kill Padme. I mean, there are a lot of opportunities to make this a big set or multiple sets. It's really cool stuff, and I really wish LEGO would remake the set. The fact that they have never remade it in 18 years is just dumb, in my opinion. And speaking of sets that they haven't remade in 18 years, the next set for $50 and 360 pieces is Jango Fett's Slave 1. We have had so many Slave 1s. Seriously, there's actually been 6 different minifigure scale versions of Slave 1s for Boba Fett. However, Jango Fett, which is the OG Slave 1, you know, chronologically and canonically in Star Wars, we've only ever gotten it once in this set, which, in my opinion, is pretty stupid because obviously they make very good Slave 1 designs, and they could just, you know, basically make the 20th anniversary Slave 1 they released in 2019 and reskin it to be the colors for Jango Fett's and sell it, and I would 100% spend $100 or more on that vehicle. They just don't, and it's very frustrating, and I really wish they did. But talking about this set specifically, it introduced a large number of new parts that were used for this vehicle and have been used for LEGO vehicles for a long time now, including a brand new cockpit piece that was used also on the 2006 and 2010 versions of Slave 1 as well. This set included Jango and Boba Fett. The Jango Fett minifigure had the old Boba Fett piece, which was kind of weird, but he had very accurate and nicely colored purple arms. And the Jango Fett figure is a very valuable figure. Now, my family, my brothers, both got this set for some reason. So we actually had 2 of this set in my house, meaning I had 2 Jango Fett figures, meaning I was okay parting with 1. And a fun little story is I went to Brick Fair, Virginia in 2011 with my Jango Fett figure, and I went to one of the vendors and I was like, hey, can I sell you this figure? And I probably got ripped off because I was 14 and a little ignorant, but the guy's like, sure, I'll sell it to you. And he gave me $80, and I was a 14-year-old, and getting $80 just right on the spot was a big deal for me. So that was really cool, fun little story about me selling those Jango Fett figures, and I still have the other one to this day because I want to, you know, keep that as kind of a memento to this set. But very cool, and a very expensive figure and a very expensive set probably because they haven't remade it. So very, very good. The set also had a very odd magnet crate feature where you could like lift up a magnet crate and put it into the Slave 1, which is something you'll see also in another set from this line. Kind of a weird thing that LEGO didn't really continue after this wave, but a weird gimmicky play feature. So a set that's very good, very iconic, really cool, and I really wish they'd remake it, but they just haven't, which is pretty annoying. Now we can talk about the biggest set from this line, the final set from this line, which is the $90 693 piece Republic gunship. Now, any opinion that I say about the Republic gunship as a vehicle is going to be very biased because I freaking adore the Republic gunship. The Republic gunship is my favorite Star Wars vehicle. I'm obsessed with this vehicle. I think it's such a cool vehicle. I have so many memories attached to this vehicle. I love the Republic gunship, and we'll talk about another version of the Republic gunship later on in this episode that I have tons of personal attachment to. This version my brother got. I also destroyed it for my brother when I was really young, which is pretty selfish of me, but I've learned since then being a super young child, and I love this set, and this set actually holds up really well today. I mean, obviously it doesn't look as good as some of the more modern versions of this vehicle, but this is the original LEGO Republic gunship. It had the same cockpit piece that the Jedi Starfighter set from this wave did, and it looked really good. It has a great shape, it had great playability, it had the same stupid magnet feature, which is very interesting, and this set introduced us to the LEGO Clone Trooper. This is the first set ever to include a Lego Clone Trooper. It had 4 of them too. They don't really do that anymore. They don't include 4 clones in a set anymore besides like battle packs. That was awesome. That was awesome for this set, and this set is pretty iconic and great for that. And it was the only set from the original wave of Attack of the Clones sets to include clone troopers, which was super cool. It was just 4 plain clones. It should have included a clone pilot, but we'll forgive it a little bit. Great figures. It also introduced us to the Super Battle Droid, which is a cool mold, and you got the iconic Lego Jedi Bob. If you don't know who Jedi Bob is, essentially Lego made up a fake Jedi and put it in this set. Why they didn't include an actual Jedi character like, Mace Windu or someone else is beyond me, but it's still an iconic character, and I hope they include Jedi Bob in the new gunship that should be coming out probably next year, which is obviously the UCS version. And I was glad to see that won, because it's the one that I voted for personally, and everyone seems pretty stoked about a UCS Republic gunship. So I'm super hyped about that, and it'd be super cool if Lego made an updated version of Jedi Bob in 2021. But I kind of doubt they will, but it'd be really cool if they did. So those are all the sets from the initial wave of Star Wars Episode 2 sets. Now, they made another wave. They made a follow-up wave in 2003. And this wave had just 2 normal sets and then 1 Technic set. So it wasn't a very big wave. It wasn't like the Episode 1 follow-up wave that was fairly big. This set just filled in a couple of small gaps, but for the most part was still very small. We got the $20 170-piece Geonosian Starfighter, which is the first ever set to include Geonosians. It also had battle droids in an exclusive and very weird kind of like pinkish sand color. Really great color for the battle droid figures. Those figures looked really good, and it was a great set. It also included the Geonosian Starfighter and the Geonosian Cannon, which when those sets were remade for the Clone Wars, not for Episode 2, they're based off the Clone Wars when they're remade, they were actually split into 2 different sets. So getting both of them in a $20 set as opposed to getting one that became a $30 and one that became a $20 set in the future, you actually got them packaged together, which is pretty cool, made for a very good deal and a good battle scene. And this definitely, just gave you something to fight with your gunship and some other sets from these lines. So great $20 set. For $70, we got the first ever Lego AT-TE, which had 650 pieces. All-Terrain Tactical Enforcer is what that stands for, if you did not know. This is the first ever appearance of this vehicle in Lego form. It's since been remade 3 times, one for the Clone Wars, one an actual remake of this set for Attack of the Clones, and then one was Captain Rex's AT-TE from Rebels, which is the most recent version. And it included 4 clone troopers, just like the gunship, which is really great. Again, no pilots, no special clones, but it was easier to army build when you got 4 of them in one set as opposed to like 1 or 2. It also had the accurate green windscreen cockpit pieces, which is something that the more modern versions have not done. But if you go watch the movie, the AT-TE definitely has green cockpits. And it's cool that Lego actually gave us an accurate cockpit piece with this original set. Not much else to say about that set. It's a great set. It holds up still pretty well today. The remakes have been better, but this one still looks really good for its time. And finally, for the initial launch, which is technically the second wave, but the early 2000s Attack of the Clones sets, we had the Hailfire droid, a $50 681-piece Technic Star Wars set. Lego made a fair number of Technic-based Star Wars sets in the early 2000s. I don't feel like people really like them. I don't know how well they sold, but just kind of based on the fact that they stopped doing it, I'm going to go ahead and guess they didn't sell super well. And this Hailfire droid used those big wheel pieces, like really large wheel pieces, and it looked good. It was pretty accurate. It was just a humongous design, and I don't really think it fit in with anything else in your Star Wars collection. It was, way too big for the rest of your vehicles to interact with. So all around, just kind of a weird and I think misjudgment of a set for Lego to make. So I definitely don't love this set, and I have no desire to ever get that set. Didn't get it back in the day. Very weird and kind of forgettable set in the history of Lego Star Wars. So like I mentioned with the whole 3D re-release thing, the next time that we got Lego Star Wars sets based off Episode 2, because besides a couple of random UCS sets that we'll talk about here in just a minute, but before we talk about those, it took an entire decade. From 2003 to 2013, we just didn't get anything for Episode 2. Now the Clone Wars sets kind of filled that void because a lot of the same and similar vehicles, but specifically based off Episode 2, we didn't get sets until 2013 when we got the 3D re-release tie-in sets. The first one is the $13 set, the only set that came out in the winter of that year, the Clone Troopers vs. Droidekas Battle Pack. It It was a $13 set, 124 pieces, included one normal clone, one Clone Trooper Sergeant, which is an exclusive minifigure with green arms and a green visor, and 2 brick-built droidicas. This droidica design isn't great, and I think a lot of people don't love this set because instead of getting a minifigure, you get 2 droidicas, which is definitely just not typical for a LEGO battle pack. It came with a small command-based build that's really crappy and looks nothing like the thing from the movie, and I have 7 of this set. This set came out when I really got into clone army building, so I bought a lot of this set, and I have a lot of extra droidicas and the build from this set just lying around. I'm happy to have the clone troopers. The rest, though, definitely stands out a bit in my bigger Star Wars collection, which is kind of a funny thing. For $20, now jumping into the summer wave, we had the Corporate Alliance Tank Droid. This set had 271 pieces, which seems like a great deal for a $20 set. However, it did include lots of tread pieces to make the big tread for the vehicle, so that piece count is a little bit misleading. This set had 1 normal clone trooper and 1 battle droid, which was now in kind of the orangish sand color, which looked good. Not quite as accurate as the one from back in the day, but it still looked pretty good. And you also got Jango Fett in this set. That was the biggest draw for this set. It was kind of a random set of a vehicle LEGO had made a couple times in the past, not based off episode 2, but they had made it. And Jango Fett being in a $20 set, which is awesome. It was the first remake of him, and he had, the more modern LEGO pieces like the new 2010 pieces they introduced for Boba Fett. He looked great. It was a great figure to get in such a cheap set, and it's really awesome that LEGO put him in such a cheap set as opposed to putting him in a bigger set and forcing you to just buy that big set to get Jango Fett. That was a great inclusion. However, the weird thing about this set is not accurate to the movie at all. The reason it's not accurate to the movie is because the Corporate Alliance Tank Droid is not in episode 2. Hailfire Droid and Spider Droids are. Tank Droids aren't. They don't show up until episode 3. So the fact that they made this set is just confusing because it's an episode 3 droid in an episode 2 set with episode 2 figures and episode 2 line. Not really sure what happened there. It's very, very confusing and inaccurate, but hey, it was a pretty good set that I actually personally owned 2 of back again when I was really into army building. Speaking of army building, the next set is the Homing Spider Droid. Now, the Homing Spider Droid was $30, had 295 pieces. It included 2 Super Battle Droids and 1 Clone Trooper, which was a great figure to get, and an exclusive Stas Ali, who has an exclusive face print and an exclusive headdress piece for this time and still at this time. Great figure. It included the big and small versions of the Spider Droids. This set was pretty much remade for exactly the same in 2016, but repackaged to be episode 3 with a couple different minifigures and slightly more updated projectile pieces. It was the first remake of this particular vehicle from the version that came out in 2008 with the Clone Wars wave. It looked a lot better than the Clone Wars wave because they used, a big Technic wheel piece and the Prince of Persia kind of dome pieces to make the shape of this droid's head. All around, I think this is a very good representation of this creature or this droid from the movies. It's a very good set. Legs are definitely a bit spindly, but it looks good. It plays well. Great $30 set. For $40, we had the Duel on Geonosis, which is kind of a remake of that Jedi Duel set we mentioned, but it's a lot bigger and a lot more expanded upon. It had 391 pieces for $40. And kind of like the Jedi Duel was the first set to ever introduce Yoda to LEGO, this was the first time Yoda had a different head mold. They changed up his head mold. He had a different color. It was now kind of the olive green as opposed to the sandy green color. He had printed on eyes. It was more rubbery and a little bit more accurate, although I still can have a weird nostalgic feeling for that OG head mold. You also got Count Dooku, who was updated and used this exact same face as the Saruman minifigure that came out in 2013 for the Lord of the Rings wave, which is kind of interesting because obviously Christopher Lee played both of those characters and they used the exact same face, which, makes sense and it worked out perfectly fine. And the set also had an exclusive Poggle the Lesser minifigure, who is a very odd and obscure Star Wars character, but had a great wing mold and a great head mold because he has Geonosian. He was also holding a printed cylinder piece of the Death Star plans, which is really cool. And this was a bigger playset. It had an updated version of Count Dooku's speeder bike in brown and gray. It was the accurate colors after the mistakes of the original one, and they really expanded upon the Geonosian, hangar that they fought in. They had a very good representation of the wall. You had some play features of being able to knock some things down. It was definitely a big improvement from the old one, and there was a pretty cool play feature where you could hook up Yoda to this Technic rod and make him flip around like he does in the movie. Silly scene in the movie, but it was a good representation of that scene in Lego form and a very fun play feature. Getting to the big sets from this line, we have the $90 ATTE, the first remake of this from Attack of the Clones. While we did get the version of it from the Clone Wars movie, this is the first new version from Attack of the Clones. It had 794 pieces, included 2 of those battle droids, one being a commander with some yellow markings. You also had a new updated version of Mace Windu, the first ever version of Mace Windu Lego has made from Attack of the Clones, and you also had a clone commander, which is a cool figure, and an exclusive Coleman Trebor, who is that dinosaur Jedi that tries to fight Jango Fett, and then Jango Fett just like kills him and he falls like 200 feet into the Geonosian arena. Then Jango Fett does that dope, gun spin thing and puts his gun back in his holster. One of the more iconic moments that, I loved as a kid, especially from Attack of the Clones, and always tried to replicate, being able to spin like a toy gun like that, but I could never really do it quite like Jango Fett does it in the films. This is the third version of this vehicle that I mentioned. I think it's still the best version of this vehicle Lego has made to this date. Even the Captain Rex AT-AT that came out a few years later, I don't think is good. And I own 2 of this set. I think it might be the biggest set that I actually own 2 of. I was really committed to my clone army build at the time, so I actually have 2 of this set, and it's a great set. I love having 2 of this vehicle, and with more Clone Trooper stuff coming out this summer for Lego Star Wars, I think I'm going to jump back into collecting more of these sets, and I'm very glad that I have 2 of this ATTE. Now, the biggest set from this wave, and the biggest set in terms of piece count and price ever made for Attack of the Clones, is the $120 1175 piece Republic gunship. Now, this set includes the big 3 minifigures, which is really great. It includes the trio of characters from the prequel trilogy. You got a new version of Obi-Wan, a new version of Anakin Skywalker, and finally a version of Padme Amidala from Episode 2 in her iconic scratched up back, midriff exposed, definitely one of my early childhood crushes, Padme Natalie Portman from that film and that outfit. Great minifigure that's still exclusive to this set to this day. This set also included 2 super battle droids, and a clone pilot that had an inaccurate helmet. It used the same helmet mold as the other clones, but the clone pilots have flat helmets. They don't have that fin at the back. And a clone captain with some red markings, which was pretty cool. And I think this is the best version of the gunship they've made to date. I'm sure the UCS version that comes out soon will, completely usurp it in that regard, but a very good version of this ship made in Lego. And this set won my voting contest for the best Attack of the Clones set, like by a landslide. It was easily the biggest blowout I've ever had for a voting contest of what set is the best from a respective theme. Like, it wasn't even remotely close. And kind of a funny thing is, the second set, the runner-up, which was way behind it still, but the runner-up for this voting contest was the AT-OT dropship, which is a Clone Wars set. That's not even a set from Attack of the Clones. So this was such a landslide victory that it didn't even beat a set from its own theme, which I thought was very odd and just kind of a funny little thing. I also would have to agree. I love this set. I still have this set perfectly preserved and built. It's one of the, prized possessions in my Lego Star Wars collection. And someone asked me last week what my favorite 3 Lego Star Wars sets were in my Q&A episode, and I mentioned this set. I adore this set. Now, as we get towards the end, I have a few miscellaneous sets from Attack of the Clones that I need to talk about. In 2015, we got the first version of the Hailfire droid from Attack of the Clones. It was a $20 set with 163 pieces. I believe it's exclusive to Target. It was the first ever version of this since they remade it. They made the first minifigure version of this in 2008 to coincide with the Clone Wars. That one used very small tread pieces. This one just had a printed, transparent, dish piece, which I thought was kind of weird. Didn't look quite as good as the treads. It didn't function super well, and honestly, I don't love this set. I think this design doesn't look great and doesn't really accurately represent this vehicle or droid from the film. Also, it included some battle droids, but you also got the Clone Trooper Lieutenant, who is the Clone Trooper with blue markings. This was a figure that was a gift with promo in 2013 when buying Star Wars sets. It was exclusive to that back then, but for some reason, Lego repackaged that figure in this set, completely ruining the value of that polybag. So that's very odd. Like I said, it already came with 2 Super Battle droids. It's not a terrible set. It was a pretty good deal, but it had no exclusive figures and actually made the value of a previously exclusive figure a lot less. So not a big fan of that set. Probably one of the worst sets from Attack of the Clones. In 2017, after 15 years, we finally got our first remake of the Jedi Starfighter. and this time it included the booster ring, which is our first ever version of this particular booster ring. Now, we did get a booster ring from LEGO in 2007, but that one was based off of Jedi Interceptor from episode 3, so this is the first booster ring from episode 2. This set was $100. It had 825 pieces, sorry for misspeaking there, and it was a Toys R Us exclusive, which, rest in peace to Toys R Us. It was a very good design. I think the booster ring looks great. The playability with the booster ring is really good. The price wasn't great, but it's easy to swoosh because the booster ring had a transparent, clear handle that you could kind of fly the thing around on, which is great. The Jedi Starfighter build, though, is ugly and clunky. Seriously, I think the Jedi Starfighter in this one looked a little bit worse and not as proportioned as well as the 2002 version 15 years later. So I remember being very let down by the design of this Jedi Starfighter. It definitely was a step down and just didn't really look very good, which is pretty sad considering how good most modern LEGO Star Wars sets look. Also, the minifigure selection, I mean, you had an exclusive Obi-Wan with a printed, head with his, thing to speak into, but besides that, it was kind of a weird figure selection. You had Boba and Jango Fett, but they had previously come in cheaper sets and like an advent calendar, so really the figures in this sets weren't great. You did get the droid with the body, though, which was an improvement over the version that came out in 2002, although you still had to rip off the droid's head and put the head onto the wing, where the body could be stored on a different location on the Jedi Starfighter in the middle. You took off a piece and put the body in the middle. Yeah. Still not a great solution, but it was slightly better. But overall, I don't think the Jedi Starfighter in this set looks very good, but I do think the booster ring looked great. So it's mostly a good set, but definitely could have been a little bit better. Finally, in 2018, we had the last minifigure scale set based off Attack of the Clones, which was the Jedi and Clone Troopers Battle Pack. This set included figures based off Episode 2, 2 clone troopers that had updated leg printings, great for army building, great figures. You also got 2 Jedi, a new version of Ki-Adi-Mundi, the first version of him from the movies, and the first ever movie version of Barriss Offee. So some great figures, great Jedi figures to get. And then you got a made-up vehicle that kind of looked like a small version of a Republic gunship, had the same color scheme and all. It was kind of a weird battle pack because a lot of people had an adverse reaction to a battle pack coming with 2 specifically named characters. Personally, I don't think the battle pack deserves that bad of a rap. I think it's a pretty good battle pack, and I was happy to get those figures in a cheap set, and I think I've personally bought 3 of this battle pack to army build this particular clone trooper, but I do see why some people have some animosity towards this battle pack. Now finally, before we conclude this episode, there are 2 UCS sets based off episode 2. One of them we actually talked about in my episode 1 video, because that set is kind of also based off episode 1, and that is the UCS Naboo Starfighter. Now the reason this set is kind of based off episode 2 is because the Naboo Starfighter is in episode 2, just at the beginning, but it is in the movie, and the box art is episode 2 based box art, which is very interesting. It's Coruscant, and it's based off that opening scene in episode 2. Also, the set came out in 2002. If you want to hear more about that set, listen to my episode 1 video though. The one definitive episode 2 UCS set until we get the Republic gunship next year is the 2010 Jedi Starfighter. They made Obi-Wan's Jedi Starfighter into a UCS scale vehicle. It was a $100 set. It's a little bit cheaper than the normal LEGO UCS set. It had 676 pieces, and it's the last ever prequel UCS set until, again, that aforementioned Republic gunship comes out, and it's an awesome set that came with a really cool dome piece that was a printed droid head. It looks really good. I think it holds up well today, and I wish I had this set. It's aftermarket sale. It's definitely gone up. It's probably worth about $200 now, but it's not too bad. And I've definitely considered ordering this set online a number of times because I definitely wish I had this UCS set in my collection. I definitely regret not purchasing it. So that's it, y'all. That is LEGO Star Wars Episode 2. A lot of stuff is going on here. It's, I think, a wave that has a lot of missed opportunity. I think they need to make some stuff they haven't, like the Geonosian Arena or Count Dooku's Solar Sailor based off this, the Clone Wars. There is stuff from this movie that they still have not made that I hope they do make, and I hope they remake some of these sets that I've already mentioned that haven't been remade in almost 20 years. The sets are great, the vehicles are great, the movie definitely isn't, but it's a very interesting crop of products for a very interesting film from, of course, a very iconic series for LEGO and cinema history. So thank you guys so much for listening to today's episode of Brickology. Go follow me on all my pages and check out my Patreon account. If you like this show, consider supporting Lego Lee on Patreon, and just $1 a month or something will go a long way to the production of this and more cool content. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter, subscribe to my YouTube channel, like me on Facebook, all of that fun stuff. Thank you guys so much for listening. This is Lego Lee 329 signing off. Peace out. Bye-bye.